little fox.
Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 4. Good News for Anne. Marilla had decided to keep Anne, but she didn't want to tell Anne until the next day. She took Anne upstairs and said,
"Now, Anne, I noticed you threw all your clothes on the floor. That's a bad habit. Please fold your clothes and put them on the chair."
"I was so upset last night I forgot,"
said Anne.
"I'll fold them nicely tonight."
"Say your prayers and get into bed."
"I never say any prayers,"
announced Anne. Marilla was horrified.
"What do you mean? Were you never taught to say prayers?"
"Well, Mrs. Thomas told me that God made my hair red on purpose, so I don't really care for God. Anyway, I'm always too tired to say prayers."
"Well, you must say your prayers here,"
Marilla insisted.
"Of course I will,"
said Anne cheerfully.
"I'm ready. What do I say?"
"Just thank God and ask for some things you want,"
Marilla told Anne.
"I'll do my best,"
promised Anne.
"Dear God, thank you for the wild cherry tree and the lake, which I call the Lake of Shining Waters. I want so many things that it'll take a long time to say everything. So the most important things are these. Please let me stay at Green Gables, and please make me pretty when I grow up."
Marilla waited until the next afternoon to tell Anne she could stay. During the morning, Marilla asked Anne to do various tasks, and she watched Anne with a keen eye. By noon, Marilla saw that Anne was a hard worker, quick to learn, clever, and obedient. Her most serious shortcoming was a tendency to start daydreaming in the middle of a task and forget everything until Marilla reprimanded her. When Anne finished washing dishes, she suddenly grabbed Marilla.
"Oh, please, Miss Cuthbert, can you tell me if I can stay or not? I've tried to be patient all morning. Please tell me."
"You haven't rinsed the dishcloth in boiling water, Anne,"
said Marilla.
"Do that first."
Anne attended to the dishcloth and then looked at Marilla again.
"Well,"
said Marilla,
"Matthew and I decided to keep you, if you are a good girl. Anne, what's the matter?"
"I'm crying,"
said Anne.
"but I don't know why. I'm so happy. Oh, happy isn't the right word. I was happy to see the trees and flowers, but this, I'll try to be so good. Mrs. Thomas said I am wicked, so it will be difficult, but I'll try. But why am I crying, Marilla?"
"I suppose because you're excited and worked up,"
said Marilla disapprovingly.
"Sit down on that chair. Try to calm down. You laugh and cry far too easily. Now, you must go to school when it starts in September. Until then, you can help me here."
"What will I call you? Miss Cuthbert? Aunt Marilla?"
"No, just Marilla. I'm not used to Miss Cuthbert. Just plain Marilla is fine."
"It sounds awfully disrespectful to say just Marilla,"
protested Anne.
"Everybody else does. Make sure you speak politely and it will be fine,"
Marilla replied.
"I'd love to call you Aunt Marilla,"
said Anne.
"I've never had an aunt or any relation at all, not even a grandmother. Please?"
"No, you can't. I don't believe in calling people names that don't belong to them."
"But we could imagine you're my aunt,"
"I couldn't,"
said Marilla grimly.
"Do you ever imagine things different from what they really are, Marilla?"
asked Anne, wide-eyed.
"No,"
said Marilla.
"Oh."
Anne drew a long breath. Then she spoke.
"Oh, Marilla, how much you miss."
Later, Anne asked,
"Marilla, do you think I will ever have a kindred spirit in Avonlea?"
A what?"
asked Marilla.
"A kindred spirit. A best friend in whom I can confide my innermost soul. I've dreamed of meeting her all my life. I never really supposed I would, but so many of my dreams have come true all at once that perhaps this one will too. Do you think it's possible?"
Diana Barry lives nearby, and she's about your age.
Marilla replied.
She's a very nice girl, and perhaps she can be your playmate when she comes home. She's visiting her aunt now. You'll have to be careful how you behave, though. Mrs. Barry is very particular. She won't let Diana play with any girl who isn't nice and good.
What is Diana like?
Anne asked.
Her hair isn't red, is it? Oh, I hope not. It's bad enough to have red hair myself, but I positively couldn't endure it in a best friend, too.
Diana is a very pretty girl,
said Marilla.
She has black eyes and hair and rosy cheeks. And she is good and smart, which is better than being pretty.
I'm so glad she's pretty,
Anne said.
I'm not beautiful, so having a beautiful friend would be wonderful. When I lived with Mrs. Thomas, there was a bookcase with glass doors. One of the doors was broken because Mr. Thomas smashed it when he was drunk. The other glass door was whole. I used to pretend that my reflection was another little girl who lived in the glass. Her name was Katie, and we were very close. I told her everything. Katie was my only friend. We pretended that the bookcase was enchanted. I knew the spell that took me to Katie's world. In Katie's world, there were flowers and fairies and sunshine, and we would live there happily ever after. When I went to live with Mrs. Hammond, I was so upset to leave Katie. She was sad, too.
Marilla listened and then gave Anne a strange look.
I don't approve of such things, Anne. You seem to half believe your own imagination. Don't let Mrs. Barry hear you talking about your friend Katie. She'll think you're strange.
Oh, I won't,
said Anne.
I won't tell anybody, but I thought you'd like to know.
Well,
Marilla said, smiling,
you'll have a real friend soon, Anne.
Look, there's a big bee in that apple blossom,
said Anne.
If I wasn't human, I think I'd like to be a bee and live in the flowers.
Yesterday you wanted to be a bird,
said Marilla.
You are very fickle. Now, just be quiet for a minute. It seems impossible for you to stop talking if you've got anybody who will listen to you.
Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 5. Mrs. Lynde is Horrified. 2 weeks had passed since Anne arrived at Green Gables. She had been very busy acquainting herself with every tree, shrub, and plant. After her discoveries, Anne would run home and tell Matthew and Marilla. Matthew listened to it all with a smile of enjoyment on his face. Marilla listened until she found herself becoming too interested in Anne's adventures, and then she told Anne to be quiet. Anne was in the orchard one day when the busybody Mrs. Lynde arrived to inspect her. Mrs. Lynde said to Marilla, "I've heard all about your orphan. It's too bad there was a mistake. Can't you send her back?"
We could, but we decided not to. Matthew liked her, and I must say, I like her too, though she's not perfect. The house is a different place already. She's a bright little thing.
"You have no experience with children, Marilla," Mrs. Lynde said, "and you can't guess how she'll be. I just hope the situation will be all right."
I'm not discouraged,
was Marilla's dry response.
I suppose you'd like to see Anne. I'll call her.
Anne ran in with her face flushed from her adventures in the orchard. But the presence of a stranger was unexpected, and Anne was suddenly shy. She stood near the door. Anne certainly was an odd-looking girl. She wore the old, ill-fitting dress from the orphanage, and her hair was messy from running around. "They didn't choose you for your looks, that's for sure," began Mrs. Lynde. "She's very skinny and plain, Marilla. Come here, child, and let me look at you. How many freckles does she have? And hair as red as carrots. Come closer, child." Anne came closer, but not exactly in the manner that Mrs. Lynde expected. With one jump, Anne stood in front of Mrs. Lynde. Anne's face was red with anger, and she trembled from head to toe.
I hate you.
she said angrily, stamping her foot on the floor.
I hate you, I hate you, I hate you!
She stamped louder each time she spoke.
How dare you call me ugly and skinny? How dare you say I have freckles and red hair? You are a rude, unfeeling woman.
Anne!
Marilla gasped. But Anne was not daunted and continued to face Mrs. Lynde with her head up and her eyes furious.
How dare you say such things about me?
She cried in a choked voice.
How would you like to be told you are fat and clumsy and probably don't have any imagination? I hope I hurt your feelings. I will never forgive you. Never, never!
Stamp, stamp. "Did you ever see such a terrible temper?" exclaimed the horrified Mrs. Lynde.
Anne, go to your room and stay there until I come up,
Marilla said, recovering her powers of speech with some difficulty. Anne burst into tears, ran through the hall, up the stairs, and slammed the bedroom door. "Well, good luck with her," said Mrs. Lynde.
You shouldn't have said those things about her, Rachel,
Marilla said. "What?" said Mrs. Lynde. "Whose side are you on, Marilla?"
I'm not trying to excuse her.
said Marilla slowly.
She was very naughty, but nobody has taught Anne what is right. And you did say too much, Rachel.
"I will be very careful when I visit again, Marilla. An orphan is more important than I am, that's clear," said Mrs. Lynde, and walked out the door in a huff. Marilla went upstairs where she found Anne face down on the bed, crying.
Anne,
said Marilla. There was no answer. "Anne," Marilla said louder.
get off the bed and listen now.
Anne sat up and looked at the floor.
Mrs. Lynde will certainly have a nice story about you to tell everyone.
Marilla went on.
You must go and say sorry to Mrs. Lynde. You must ask her to forgive you.
I can never say sorry,
said Anne.
You can punish me, Marilla. You can put me in a deep, dark dungeon with snakes and feed me bread and water. I will not say sorry.
There aren't any dungeons in Avonlea, but you will stay in your room until you say sorry to Mrs. Lynde.
Then I will stay here forever,
Anne replied.
I am not sorry. I am happy I said those things.
At that, Marilla left the room. Downstairs, Marilla told Matthew the story, impressing upon him the seriousness of Anne's misbehavior.
Mrs. Lynde is an old gossip,
Matthew retorted.
Matthew, I'm astonished. Don't you think Anne should be punished?
Marilla asked.
Yes, of course,
Matthew answered.
but not too much. You will give her something to eat while she stays in her room.
When do I starve people, Matthew?
Said Marilla angrily.
Matthew was no help.
She thought. Marilla brought breakfast, lunch, and dinner to Anne's bedroom. Anne still did not want to say sorry. Matthew crept upstairs and went to her room.
Anne,
He whispered.
how are you?
I'm all right. It is lonely, though.
Anne smiled sadly, thinking of the many years she would stay in the room.
And how about you say sorry soon?
Matthew whispered again.
Well, I am sorry now.
Anne admitted.
But I can't tell Mrs. Lynde. It would be so humiliating. But I will do anything for you if you really want me to.
Of course I want you to say sorry. It's too quiet without you, Anne. Just go and say sorry. There's a good girl.
Very well.
Said Anne.
But don't tell Marilla I asked you.
I won't.
Said Anne. Matthew left, surprised by his success. Then Anne leaned over the stair banisters.
Marilla, I'm ready to say sorry.
Anne and Marilla went to Mrs. Lynde's house. As they walked, Anne did not look sorry. In fact, she looked very happy.
What are you thinking, Anne?
Marilla asked.
I'm thinking of what to say to Mrs. Lynde.
Anne said. Marilla was suspicious, but said nothing. As usual, Mrs. Lynde sat at the kitchen window watching everything that went on outside the house. Anne suddenly kneeled in front of the surprised Mrs. Lynde and spoke.
Oh, Mrs. Lynde, I am so sorry. There are not enough words in the dictionary to say how sorry I am. What you said was true. My hair is red, and I'm freckled and skinny and ugly. What I said was true too, but I shouldn't have said it. Please, please, please forgive me?
There was no doubt Anne was sincere. But unlike Marilla, Mrs. Lynde did not realize that Anne was also having fun. It was very dramatic, and Anne loved drama. Mrs. Lynde just said, "Get up, child. Of course I forgive you. Your hair is a terrible color, but maybe it will change when you grow up."
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Lynde,
Anne said.
You give me hope.
With that, Mrs. Lynde was satisfied. Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 6, A Best Friend and a Lost Brooch. One day, Marilla said,
Diana Barry is home, Anne. I'm going to the Barrys today. You can come with me and meet Diana.
Anne looked up at Marilla.
I'm nervous. What if Diana doesn't like me?
Diana will like you.
Marilla said firmly.
But if Mrs. Barry doesn't like you, it won't matter how much Diana likes you.
Anne and Marilla went to the Barrys' house.
Come in.
Mrs. Barry said cordially.
Is this the girl you've adopted?
Yes, this is Anne,
said Marilla.
Spelled with an E.
Anne whispered. When Diana came in, Anne saw she was a pretty girl with a happy face.
Diana, take Anne to the garden and show her your flowers,
said Mrs. Barry. Outside, Anne and Diana sat among the roses, daffodils, daisies, and violets.
Oh, Diana,
Anne blurted out.
Can I be your best friend?
Diana laughed.
I guess so,
she said.
I'm glad you're living at Green Gables. There's no other girl who lives close, and my sisters are too little to play with. Will you be my friend forever and ever? We must hold hands, like this,
Anne said eagerly. Diana looked surprised, but said,
All right, I'll say the oath first.
Anne said,
I promise to always love my dear best friend, Diana Barry, as long as the sun and moon are in the sky.
Diana repeated the oath with a laugh.
You're a strange girl, Anne, but I think I'm going to like you very much.
The next day, Anne hurried into the house.
Oh, Marilla,
she cried.
There's going to be a Sunday school picnic next Wednesday, right near the Lake of Shining Waters. And Mrs. Lynde is going to make ice cream. Think of it, ice cream. Can I go?
Yes, of course,
Marilla answered.
But,
Anne stammered.
Diana says that everyone must take a basket of things to eat. I can't cook, and...
I'll bake something for you to bring,
said Marilla.
Oh, you're so kind to me,
Anne exclaimed, kissing Marilla's cheeks. It was the first time in Marilla's life that a child had kissed her. She was secretly very pleased at Anne's impulsive show of affection, but she said gruffly,
All right, stop your kissing nonsense.
It was Sunday, 3 days before the picnic, and Marilla wore her amethyst brooch to church as usual. The brooch was Marilla's most treasured possession. When Anne had first seen the brooch, she'd thought it was very beautiful too.
Can I hold the brooch for a minute?
She had asked.
I think amethysts are sweet, like violets.
On Tuesday evening, Marilla was frowning.
Have you seen my amethyst brooch?
She asked Anne.
I can't find it anywhere.
I saw it this afternoon when you went out,
said Anne a little slowly.
I was passing by and I saw it, so I went to look at it.
Did you touch it?
Said Marilla sternly.
Yes,
Anne admitted hesitantly.
I pinned it on, just to see how it would look.
That was wrong, Anne. Where did you put it?
I put it near the mirror. I'm sure I put it back.
Anne said.
Well, now it's gone.
Said Marilla. She looked again, but she didn't see it anywhere.
Anne, you were the last person to touch it. Did you take the brooch and lose it?
No,
said Anne.
I never took your brooch out of the room. That's the truth.
Marilla got angry.
I think you are lying, Anne.
She said.
Go to your room and stay there until you are ready to confess.
But the picnic is tomorrow, Marilla,
Anne exclaimed.
I'll stay in my room after the picnic, but I must go to the picnic.
You aren't going anywhere until you confess,
Marilla said firmly.
Oh, Marilla,
gasped Anne. But Marilla had left. Marilla was worried. She was worried about her valuable brooch. She was worried that Anne told lies. Marilla searched the room again, but found nothing. Anne steadfastly refused to confess. Wednesday was sunny, a perfect day for a picnic. When Marilla took Anne her breakfast, she found Anne sitting on her bed.
I'm ready to confess,
Anne said.
Ah,
Marilla said. Her punishment had worked, but the success was bitter.
I took the amethyst brooch.
Anne began.
It was so beautiful. I put it on my dress and pretended I was a beautiful lady who lives in a castle. I went to the lake of shining waters and the brooch fell off into the water and sank. That's my best confession.
Marilla became very angry. Anne had lost her precious brooch and did not seem sorry at all.
Anne, you are a very wicked girl,
Marilla said.
Yes, I suppose I am,
agreed Anne.
You have to punish me. Can you punish me quickly so I can go to the picnic?
Marilla snorted.
Picnic? You're not going to the picnic. That is your punishment.
Anne jumped to her feet.
But you promised me. Oh, Marilla, I must go to the picnic. That's why I confessed. Please let me go. There will be ice cream.
You're not going to the picnic, and that's final,
Marilla said. Anne cried out loudly and flung herself on the bed, crying and crying.
I believe the child is crazy,
Marilla said as she left the room. Later, Marilla decided to mend a black scarf. The scarf was in a box near the window. As Marilla held it up, something sparkled in the sunlight. Marilla gasped. It was the amethyst brooch, hanging off the end of the scarf.
I picked up this scarf on Monday,
Marilla thought.
The brooch must have caught onto it.
Marilla rushed to Anne's room.
I've just found my brooch. What story did you tell me this morning?
Anne replied,
You said I must stay in my room until I confessed. So I confessed because I wanted to go to the picnic. I thought of a good story, but I can't go to the picnic anyway.
Marilla had to laugh.
Anne, you are a surprise. It was wrong for you to lie, but I understand why, and I should have believed you in the first place. So, if you forgive me, I forgive you. Now, get ready for the picnic.
But isn't it too late?
No, it's only 2 o'clock. Wash your face and comb your hair, and I'll get some food ready.
Oh, Marilla, 5 minutes ago I wished I was never born. Now I wouldn't change places with an angel.
That night, Anne returned to Green Gables happy and tired.
It was wonderful. We rowed a boat, and Jane Andrews nearly fell in the lake and drowned. I wish it was me. How romantic to nearly drown.
After Anne went to bed, Marilla smiled and thought,
It's never boring with Anne around.